She was just part of the community. She was a little eccentric.
My mother and her sisters were terribly frightened of Lucy. They wouldn't go anywhere near her.
I only remember her as a small person in stature and a small person altogether. And she may have had fair skin. She was not dark complected.
She was by all measure reclusive, never married, devoted to her father, and by most accounts an astute businesswoman. The only facts that seem to be of any certainty are her birth, her death, and her wishes for her estate.
The thing that amazes me, she spells everything out in her will, what she wants. And she has two wills. Her earliest will, in the early 1900s, her main focus was to establish a library here in Rockland. But Lucy lived to see the Carnegie Library built. And her first will was very extravagant. She wanted to build several churches. She wanted an Orthodox Congregational church. And she wanted several parks. She wanted a park in Thomaston named after her sister. She wanted a park here in Rockland named after her brother. She wanted an art gallery that was to be named after her brother. But she had all these different projects in her earlier, and I think maybe then the Depression happens, which might have changed her mind, and then her focus becomes more of a art library and art gallery. So, and this house, she wanted the Farnsworth homestead to be preserved as a house of its time.
There are no confirmed images of Lucy. For years it was believed that a painting of a young girl holding hands with her brother was Lucy. However, discovery of additional family material later confirmed that the girl in the painting was in fact Lucy's sister, Fanny. Today, only one photo remains unidentified. Found with other family photos but unmarked, resemblance suggested as a Farnsworth, but no conclusive evidence exists.
So in the family photos, a lot of them are identified, but there is one ambrotype that was a photograph of a woman, young woman, and there's a definite family resemblance to the other sisters and to the mother in the family. And the timing is right for ambrotypes and the age of the woman that it could be Lucy.
It was said that as a child she possessed neither beauty nor merriment, and due to the dynamic personalities of her sisters, she became withdrawn and solitary at a very young age. Sent away, against her will, to a finishing school in Boston, there is speculation that her interest in art was first aroused during her years there. But growing up in a household with a piano, which she played, and numerous prints and paintings adorning the walls, it is much more likely that an appreciation for the arts had been instilled at a much younger age. One thing was certain. Upon her return to Rockland, it became clear that she preferred the affairs of business to those of the heart, and thus she remained unattached. Over the years, the legend of Lucy Farnsworth has grown beneath the cloak of misunderstanding. Much of her wealth was based on extensive real estate holdings, and her tenants would come to the dining room window where Lucy would collect rents, making change from the cash she kept in a porcelain soup tureen on the table.
She had taken her father's small fortune and reinvested it. She invested in the stock market. She got out before the crash. I had an elderly volunteer here once whose father was a stockbroker here in Rockland, and he told her that he made an appointment to see Lucy, thinking that an elderly woman alone would be an easy sell. He comes to this house, spends some time with Lucy Farnsworth. He said he walked out of this house so impressed with what she knew about finances. And so she did. She took care of her took care of her own finances. She invested in stocks and bonds. She invested in a lot of real estate. She did own a lot of real estate around in this area. And she actually puts in her will that she believes that real estate is the best form of investment.
I was impressed that Lucy was like that, because there were a lot of women when I was growing up that they weren't in business. And I thought, you know, she did okay, earned all that money, and then donate it to the town, because that really surprised a lot of people. You know, that was a lot of money back then.
And she did her banking in Boston, and that's how she found the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company.
Ralph Lowell, who was the venerable Lowell family from Boston, would tell this story every year. He'd stand up, at that point he was in his 80s, and describe Lucy Farnsworth coming to Boston to find where she could put her money, and being thrown out of every bank she went to. Apparently she was sort of, he gave this wonderful story, and of course she went to the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust and was thrown out of there, and on her way out, this young clerk stopped her and said, "May I help you?" And of course it was Ralph Lowell, who was clerking for his father, his grandfather. And that's how the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust became the sort of the financial person for the museum.
What I heard how she selected the bank was, well, Lucy Farnsworth, being so frugal, always wore her 19th century clothes. So she dressed in black. She wore long black skirts and her clothes were not in the best of condition. And she went to Boston, and the story I've heard is that she went into one bank, asked to use the ladies' room, and they refused her. And then she went to the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company, and they were very gracious to her.
And so she came out and set up everything with them and got them to be the trustees. I thought that was a marvelous story. Everything tied to a trip to the bathroom.
Lucy had help off and on who lived in this house. We have a letter from one of the maids who lived with Lucy for a while. And one of the things she complained about was this house was cold, because Lucy kind of rationed the coal that went into the furnace. So you could tell that she watched her pennies. She didn't spend any money on herself.
Penny pinching stories are abundant, but since many exist in more than one form, their accuracy remains in doubt. For example, it was said that she often sent her errand boy to the butcher to purchase a frugal 5 cents worth of scrap meat for her cat. But in fact, she had no pet. According to another version, she dispatched one boy and then sent a second to cancel the order because her cat had just killed a sparrow.
All these stories, all these myths that we heard growing up about this mysterious lady. Now, my father had a store and a concession at the corner of across the street, Main Street, on the end of the Strand Theater. And we children had to do our jobs by helping out. We were a big family of 7 children. We all took our turns keeping store, even at a young age. So the store had to stay open till 7 o'clock at night till the movie theater was out. And I remember standing at the door and looking out the window of the door. And it looked right up Elm Street to Lucy Farnsworth's house. And at night, I could see her walk through the house, through one floor to the other, holding a candle. In the days of electricity, I thought that was rather odd. But this was her way. She wanted to do things her way. I just remember shortly an episode with my mother. And my mother, in her early marriage, lived in the house just in back of Lucy Farnsworth's house. And my mother had done her wash, and she had done it by hand for all her small children. And she went out to string a clothesline to hang her wash. So she picked the nearest tree and hung a clothesline. When she came home, the clothesline was down. Lucy Farnsworth had come out from her house and cut the rope to the clothesline. I'm sure my mother never knew who the tree belonged to when she hung the clothesline. And I'm sure Lucy Farnsworth was too much of a recluse to tell my mother not to. But this was a story that my mother related to me.
For the most part, the people of Rockland maintained an uneasy connection to this little woman dressed in well-worn clothing from a bygone era. At one especially lean time in the city's history, it was said that the town fathers drew straws to see which would approach Lucy about a much-needed loan. The loser rang nervously, and when met by Lucy, explained the town's dilemma. Money was handed over with little question, repayment never called upon. Other times, however, Lucy had entered into litigation against the city, and often threatened to move the headquarters of her father's water company to Camden to avoid Rockland's higher tax rate. As years passed, even though she built substantially upon the value of the estate her father had left to her, she refused to install electricity and lived only in the kitchen, the small bedroom in the rear of the house on the second floor, and in the dining room which had become her counting room. During the final years of her life, the front parlors remained closed and were seldom open to guests.
We were teenagers in Rockland, Maine, and with very little to do. And Lucy Farnsworth, well, I don't know why we looked at her as a character. She wasn't really not a character. She was a small woman, and she wore long clothes all of the time. And of course, the fact that she lived in a large home, and what we looked at as a nice home. We decided, one of my friends decided that we would pay her a visit. I can't tell you whether the visit was out of curiosity or whether at that age we were just kind and thought perhaps she would like to have some guests. So we did knock at her door, and we told her that we wanted to come to visit her. And she did invite us in, very cordially. She invited us in. But she locked the door behind us, and because of that, it frightened us, frankly. We frightened us. In those days, no one locked the door, even to let you in or to for no reason at all. So and we did sit down, and I remember something that stood out in my mind was she had a very large baby grand piano, a beautiful piano, and I'm not so sure, but I think there was a photo on that piano. And she spoke only about her sister, and I'm terribly sorry I can't recall the conversation. We were there a little while, and we left. And I will just mention to you that we were glad to get out of the house safely.
It's on Pleasant Street. And Lucy, well, all her family members are dead. And they're all buried in different cemeteries around the area. So Lucy decides to build a family cemetery here in town. And what I recently found out is when you go look at that cemetery, is that it was 13 acres when she planned it. So it was family land. What she does, though, is she brings her parents back, all her younger siblings who had died at an early age. She brings her sister back, who's buried with her husband in Thomaston, but leaves the brother-in-law behind. She brings her brother back, who's buried with his wife in Belfast, but leaves her sister-in-law behind. So in this family cemetery, Lucy brings her family members back together.
Finally, in October of 1935, at the age of 97, Lucy Farnsworth died alone in the bedroom she had used most all her life. After her death, many thousands of dollars were discovered in various forms scattered throughout the house, behind picture frames, in books, under the stair treads, and of course in the soup tureen. The house she lived in stands alone as the only concrete evidence of her existence.
Of course, when she died, we read the local paper, and we were curious, more curious because she did leave a lot of money, and some of the merchants said that she was very frugal. In fact, one mentioned in a store that she traded, and bought groceries, she purchased one potato for herself. Well, in those days, I don't know, I came from a family of six children. I was the oldest of six, and then parents. And of course, maybe one potato was a big deal. Who eats one potato, or who has one potato in the house? But today, being alone, I go grocery shopping. I don't buy one potato, but I'll buy, say, 2 pears. It's not. It doesn't. I don't think I'm frugal. Far from it. But in those days, they only. Well, that I don't think I'm frugal. But perhaps if I had a great deal of money, somebody would say, yes, I am frugal.
I've really come to believe that those stories are just myths, and that she was just a recluse, and this is the way she wanted to live.
As stipulated in her will, the Farnsworth homestead remains unchanged. No furnishings have been added or removed. Everything remains just as it was in her father's lifetime. All the contents were purchased from 1850 when the house was built to 1876 when William died. Often when you visit an historical home, research has reconstructed how we think that people might have lived. But here in Rockland is a home truly frozen in time. This far-reaching legacy from a most unlikely source continues to enrich the place she called home. And when we move through the rooms of the homestead, we can only imagine what Lucy might have thought about her life and what she was leaving to the people of her hometown. Today, her generosity shines brightly at the center of Rockland, and as the headline in the August 17, 1948 edition of the Courier-Gazette reads, Rockland is justly proud.